You ever been driving down the interstate and you see a billboard from Northrop Grumman advertising something like a new prototype stealth bomber, or a General Dynamics ad telling you that you need to buy an entire Air Force? You might have never given this a second thought, but just think about it for a second. Who are these for? Why is General Dynamics trying to sell you F-16s while you sit in the dentist's office reading old magazines? Why is Raytheon advertising the F-35's engine on the DC Metro? It's not like any actual human being that consumes these advertisements could afford these. And even if they could afford just one of them, the government isn't going to just let you buy the newest machine gun prototype, even though they should. If I was your boss and you came up to me and said, hey, let's spend millions in advertising on products that no one can literally legally buy, I would call you crazy. But they do it anyway, so why? Billboards, Super Bowl commercials, and Metro flyers ain't cheap, and the American defense industry spent an eye-watering $700 million on advertising and media in 2023, which again was largely consumed by millions of people who can neither afford nor legally obtain their products. So why do they do it? When I first started looking for answers to this question, the first thing I stumbled upon was this article titled "The Media Technology Military Industrial Complex." It didn't have what I was looking for, and neither did the second, third, or fourth thing. And I was only able to find the $700 million figure based on DoD financial reports. So I realized I needed to go about this question differently. I started by looking at the 5 largest defense companies in the United States, mostly because I don't have an editor and adding more than 5 logos onto this screen would have sent me into a spiral. These companies are General Dynamics in 5th place, RTX at 4th, Northrop Grumman 3rd, Boeing 2nd, and Lockheed Martin 1st. Diving into things like annual reports and finance news, I was still pretty hard-pressed to find any number on how much each of these spend on advertising. Raytheon, for example, gives no information on advertising costs, but are famous, or rather infamous, for their posters in the DC Metro station around our nation's capital. I understand not feeling like the urge to publish that information, because generally investors aren't going to care if you're just posting stratospheric profits every year. But what if it's just a little bit more sinister than that? What if it's all a big conspiracy to manufacture public consent towards violent imperialism and the dehumanization of our fellow man? I mean, it may be. We'll get to that point later in the video. Interestingly enough, though, there are some rules that these companies are kind of skirting around in what they are and aren't allowed to do. In the DC Metro specifically, you're not allowed to have certain kinds of advertisements, specifically advertisements that are intended to influence public policy, according to the Metro Authority. The Pentagon Metro stop is the primary congregating point for workers out of the Pentagon that don't directly live next to it, and it sees thousands of federal and military officials walking in and out of it every day. Raytheon, now called RTX after a super slick rebranding move, has over 60 different posters in and around the metro station, across walls, the floors, escalators, and fare gates. You literally could not avoid seeing one of these advertisements unless you walked from the train to your office with your eyes completely closed. Looking at this graph from August of 2023, you see a number of stations on the bottom and what percent of advertisements related to defense contractors on the side. The Pentagon stop was literally 100%. That's all the percents. They don't make them any bigger. Compare this to the other stops that see high foot traffic centered around government offices, because at the Foggy Bottom GWU stop, which caters to riders heading to work at the State Department, defense contractors only made up 6% of advertisements. In Capitol South, which borders the office for the House of Representatives, you know, the people who come up with your yearly fiscal defense budget, it was 34%. Of all the advertisers in the DC Metro, 15 received at least $5 million in federal contracts last year. Of those 15, 10 were defense contractors, and those 10 alone earned over $83.1 billion from the federal government last year. But one funny thing about these advertisements is that people have no idea what they're looking at. In one instance, someone thought that UAVs had something to do with AIDS. But it's not just posters in the train that target the 3 acquisitions officers that actually use public transit. Here's the thing though, it's not accidental that these posters and advertisements aren't geared towards your average consumer. I mean, a normal person basically has a 50-50 chance of knowing which end of this engine is the front and which is the back. Take this phrase from a DC radio station commercial, for example. Agencies demand provider diversity on networks on WITS 3 and GSA Schedule 70, and Level 3 delivers it. Does that mean anything to you? I was in the military for 10 years and I had no idea what that meant. Translated from lizard person talk into normal human English, you get that the company Level 3, now part of Lumen Technologies by the way, is trying to sell internet services to government offices. The entire purpose of using acronyms instead of words that a human with a soul would use in normal conversation is that it weeds out everyone who's not just a guy trying to buy Wi-Fi routers for the offices of the Department of the Interior. This kind of super specific advertising is called targeted or niche marketing, and it makes sense because if you're trying to sell stealth fighter engines, the guy on his way to work selling timeshare packages probably doesn't need to know that the ECU upgrade for the F-135 engine will increase loitering capabilities. Now, should these kinds of advertisements not be allowed in the DC Metro because they are trying to influence public policy? Yes and no, but like a really big yes, and then just like a little teeny tiny no. Technically, and I mean technically with all the nerdy emojis and the biggest quotation marks I could find, they are advertising a product to be sold just like anyone else would. That said, literally the only people who could see these advertisements and do anything with them are those who make large-scale policy decisions regarding the purchasing of military equipment costing millions of taxpayer dollars and having a significant impact on our national defense. Most would argue that this would constitute public policy, but if you've ever tried to get somewhere on time while riding the red line on the DC Metro, you know that their legal office probably is something akin to that one video of the orangutan hitting nails with the wrong side of a hammer. Fucking love that video, bro. Also worth noting, if I decided that I wanted to buy a 5th generation fighter engine and then managed to actually afford one, guys in suits and black SUVs would roll it to my house faster than the check would even clear. Now, it's easy to see that hyper niche advertisements around the Pentagon are directed at acquisitions officials and high-level bureaucrats. Cool. Got it. Simple. Easy. Why did they tease the B-21 Raider at the Super Bowl? Why go through the effort of making video content for aircraft carrier shipyards? And why does General Dynamics post sci-fi LARP on their YouTube page? There are generally 3 reasons why a company in the defense sector would spend millions of dollars on advertisements meant for just the common person. And in order of least to most evil, we have recruiting, investors, and public sentiment. We'll start with job recruiting. Simply put, the defense industry is massive and they need a lot of people to work it. There are currently 3 million Americans working in the defense sector, which if you do the math, is 1 million more people than are actually in the military. Unlike other industries where you constantly see their products on the road, on store shelves, or hanging over someone's shoulder, brand recognition isn't just going to occur naturally. Raytheon doesn't have a giant RTX sticker on the side of its missiles, and General Dynamics has failed to grasp how beautifully trashy it would be to put a hood ornament on the barrels of tanks. Advertising is a way to ensure that people know that these companies exist in the first place. Now, obviously, if the pay is good enough, people are going to find you regardless. There are plenty of companies and corporations that do zero advertising and have no problem keeping a full staff. But the thing is, with defense contracts, it's hyper competitive. It's this competitiveness that means these corporations want to be people's first choice to work. The branding carries a weight to it that people want on their resumes. This means that with a combination of name dropping and lucrative pay, you're able to get some of the best engineers, designers, and scientists on your payroll, rather than just whoever you can find to fill a spot. If you're able to recruit the best, there's a bigger chance you'll get the multi-billion-dollar government contract. And then the cycle repeats itself forever until we finally convert to a full war economy a la MGS4. Can't wait. Second on the reason to advertise to the normal person is investment. Developing the latest and greatest in technology designed to kill foreigners is unbelievably expensive, which I guess we should be grateful there's a high barrier to entry in that regard and that we don't have mom and pop shops churning out killing machines on the regular. But if you're building the next Wonder Waffle, you're going to need a lot of capital. And see, government contracts only get you so far, and the defense industry usually works backwards compared to the civilian market. See, a company building technology for the government isn't just going to come out with a new line of tanks and hope that some of them get bought. Building things like tanks, planes, and rockets requires massive industrial effort. That means entire factories custom built for an exact piece of equipment, workers trained for months to produce just a single widget, and years of research and development that costs billions. Instead, companies like RTX, Boeing, and General Dynamics only produce exactly what the federal government has come to them and expressed a need for. It's only after contracts have been secured do they go through with the effort and money to start production. This is different than, say, an auto company that comes out with a new model of car. Realistically, anyone can buy the car, and even if it's not super popular, prices on it can be reduced until eventually it gets to the point where they're all sold off. If your company builds a fighter jet and no military wants it, you have nowhere else to sell it to. And now you have a warehouse full of multi-billion-dollar failures that, if you don't sell any to the government and there's no one else to buy them, odds are your ass is going to the unemployment line. Defense companies leverage this kind of risk and time between contracts through gaining investors. If we look at Boeing's 2023 financial report, their total revenue was $66 billion. $23 billion came directly from government contracts, but they had $55 billion in what they called cash flow from financing activities. And this is a combination of freeing up stock and loans from major banks. 30% of that $55 billion, or about $16.5 billion, came directly from normal people just investing in the stock market, while the rest came from institutional investments like mutual and index funds, which themselves are also largely held by individual investors. The massive increase in cash flow ensures that if Boeing attempts at making another Death Star laser that shits out the second you try to use it, they can still stay above water until like another one of their planes crashes. I don't know, we'll see. If you can show the American people patriotic videos of sick military equipment, they're gonna eat that shit up and be more likely to put money into your stock. And now for the evil last one that I've saved to the very end of the video because my audience retention sucks. The final reason that these companies would want to do this kind of thing is called manufacturing consent, which is the idea that media changes public perception of the world in a way that benefits the powers that be, mainly things like the dominant political and economic ideologies of the time. The defense industry benefits from media exposure because images of cool jets and explosions drives viewer engagement, and corporate conglomerates often have economic ties to both the defense and the media sectors, basically just double dipping in the benefits. These defense industries have a vetted interest in agenda setting, and they frame the problems of the world to be things like terrorism, war against unnamed countries, and potential nuclear apocalypse. They, of course, offer the solutions to these conveniently enough. Leveraging things like the normalization of militarism and tugging on patriotic heartstrings, they win over the favor of those that just need a little flash of the red, white, and blue to throw their support that way. Basically, manufacturing consent boils down to integrating the military-industrial complex into American culture, which, if you can manage that, you'll get people and the government to make political decisions that favor your defense company. Now, is there like some fraction of all these advertisements that's just like for the cool factor? There's got to be. If I had a slow-mo camera and unlimited prototype military equipment, you best believe this YouTube channel would look very different. And I'll end this by saying I have never worked for a defense company. I used their products for a few years. But I could be completely wrong on all this, so if I am, please let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, blah blah, subscribe.